The current implementation of our Chuck Norris joke package is quite limited. We only have 3 jokes in place, and whenever we want to add new jokes, we have to modify our files. This is not really convenient. Now, I want to make use of something that I found, which I think is quite awesome, which is an API for Chuck Norris jokes. So this is the ICNDB, which is called the Internet Chuck Norris Database, and they have an API for Chuck Norris jokes. The API is really simple. You just make a GET request to api.icndb.com/jokes/random, and then you receive a result that looks something like this. So this would be the response, and in there we get the joke. And now I want to modify our package so that it can consume this API and use this instead of the static joke arrays. All right, so let's get started by writing some tests for this and then implement the actual package. So to perform the HTTP calls, I'm going to use a library called Guzzle. Guzzle is one of the most common used HTTP request classes for PHP. It's an HTTP client, so we can just require this using Composer and add it as a dependency to our Chuck Norris jokes repository and package. So in here, I'm going to add Composer, require Guzzle HTTP Guzzle. And as you can see, this is now using version 6.3 with a Corée sign, so the semantic versioning constraint for our package. So if we take a look at the Composer JSON file now for our project, we can see that Composer has automatically added Guzzle as a dependency to our Composer JSON file. All right, so with Guzzle in place, we are able to make HTTP calls to the API endpoint. Now, what would our test look like in this case? So I think it's safe to say that we can remove these tests because this one will no longer work. And the one test that we have is it returns a random joke. Now, let's see, how are we going to do this? We would create a new joke factory. And this joke factory would receive a Guzzle client. So let's create a new client in here, just like this, import it. So we have the Guzzle HTTP client. Okay, by giving the joke factory the dependency, we are now able to test this client dependency by giving it to the factory, rather than just newing up the client inside of the factory itself. So then we would call getRandomJoke, and we would make an assertion that we receive some kind of random joke. Now, since we are making HTTP calls, what we can do and what we need to do is we have to mock the actual response so that we do not actually call the HTTP API, because that would be quite hard to test in this case. But instead, we would mock that we receive a response that looks something like this, and then make the assertion based on this mocked response that we have. Now, if we take a look at the Guzzle documentation, then we have a section called Testing Guzzle Clients. And there we have a little thing called mock handlers. And this is what we want. So we can create a new mock handler, and this mock handler will have predefined responses that we have. And this response can then be used in our assertion. So what we can do is basically copy this code here and create a new client like this. All right, fix the insertion. Let's do it like this, and we have some more space. And the one response that we want to test would be something like this. So we need to import the mock handler. We need to import the response. We need to import the handler stack, and the client is already in place. Okay, let's add some spacing in here. All right, now if we take a look at the response, then we have all the different status codes. And in the constructor, we have the status, the headers, and the body. Okay, so in our case, we would have a response with a status code 200. Let's skip the headers, and then we have a body, which would be the JSON that we want to mock. So in our case, we can just use this raw JSON from the API response and paste it in here. Okay. And now if we make this call and try to get a random joke, we can assert that the response that we get is actually this text. All right. So let's copy this in here. Okay, so this would be the test that we want to make. So we test that when we call get random joke, we assert that we make the call to the API endpoint and receive this response. And based on this response, we want the joke to be this kind of text. Okay, now if we try and run the test, of course, this is going to fail because, well, our current constructor requires an array or null, but we're giving it the client object. So let's fix this by going to our joke factory. We can get rid of the jokes. This can go as well. And instead of receiving a joke, we can receive a guzzle client. And we can also say that this could be null. So let's import this and save the client as a property on the class. And then we say this client is equal to client. And if it does not exist, then we will simply new up a guzzle client. This way, if someone wants to consume our joke factory, they can just create a new joke factory object without specifying the client. But in our tests, we can give it the dependency it needs and perform the actual tests. All right. So now getRandomJoke needs to make the HTTP call. So in here, the API endpoint would be this. So I would like to store this as a constant in our class. So API endpoint is going to be this. And then we would do something like this. Response is going to be this client. Then we make a GET request to the API endpoint constant. And then we would return JSON decode response get body get contents like this, and this would now return the full object that we receive. So let's try this by running the tests again. Okay, undefined class constant API endpoint. Oh yeah, I have a typo in here. Endpoint. All right, try it again. Okay, now the assertion is wrong because now we're returning the full object. So here we can see the mocked response that we have, but we are testing that this is identical to this text that we have here. So what we would do is let's store this in a variable, and then we would return joke. What's it? Joke value joke. Like this. Test again, and now it's green. So of course this does not handle any kind of error handling when the client performs a request and it returns, for example, a status 200, 500 or something else. So it's not a successful request. But this would be the best possible scenario where we make the request, we get the random joke, and then we can just return it. And our joke test is now working as well. So with this, we just added a new client as a dependency, we made it testable, and we implemented the base logic in our code.